This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 480 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and joining me for this episode is Anthony Chen, head brewer for AleSmith in San Diego. Welcome to the podcast, Anthony.
Well, thanks for having me, Jamie.
You've been at AleSmith for quite a long time now, 17 years. And if I think about all of the beers that I have had from AleSmith over that kind of time period, it is wildly extensive. I mean, I remember back in the early days of the 20-teens, staking every time I was in San Diego, staking out barrel-aged beers from that I could only buy at the tap room. The stuff that you all made with barrel-aged Speedway was just this coveted stuff. Some of my favorite beers of that early 20-teens in that generation. Things like your Wee Heavy, your Old Ale, Old Numbskull, have won so many medals across all of the competitions. GABF, World Beer Cup, all the big stuff. 21 GABF medals in AleSmith's history, 13 World Beer Cup medals in AleSmith's history. And then, of course, last year, you all sent us this weird and interesting beer, Handgepluk. And our blind panel got a hold of it, in a Belgian Creek style beer with these beautiful Skedderbeek's cherries, and scored a 98 with the magazine. Immediately then, within a couple weeks, went into our judging for best in beer and won a editor's pick for one of our best favorite beers, best beers of 2025. And then you went and entered that beer, Handgepluk, into World Beer Cup, and just a couple weeks ago won a gold medal for that. Thank you for World Beer Cup judges for confirming, our judging expertise here at Craft Beer and Brewing. But no, it's always awesomely fun to see when those two things happen and coincide like that. And so, I figured, hey, it's World Beer Cup season. We haven't talked about this from our best in beer time, and we should get a conversation going because we've never in the history of the podcast done an AleSmith episode. And so here we are. And Anthony, I'm going to press you about Handgepluk, even though I would not venture to say that this is just a crazy hot core brand, for you all at AleSmith.
Right. So this was a really fun project. It kind of started with you probably heard of Chad Stevens. He's a prominent home brewer in this area. I think about a couple years ago, or maybe longer, he got a hold of some Skedderbeek cherries and brought them over to the States and started growing them in the area south of San Diego, Humboldt, a lot of farmland. And he's a big fan of lambic beers, and he would always buy some lambic beers. And one time he came up to us and said, "Yo, this patch that you guys made, what did you guys do?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What did we do? We just made it." It's like, this is awesome. And then that conversation just kept going a little bit more and more. He's like, "Hey, I got these cherries. It'll be ripe at some point. Like, do you want to try and make some?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like a fun thing to do." And so we collaborated with Tom and Tyson at O'Brien's for their 30th anniversary. So we decided, hey, let's make this as a 30th anniversary beer for O'Brien's. So that's how that project got started. But
that's awesome. Well, I want to talk more about this. Those cherries are incredibly difficult just to grow. From what I have been told by Belgian brewers. In fact, there's a great episode with Geert Christians from Oud Beersel where he talks about just the challenge of just simply growing Skedderbeek's cherries, and they have to grow a new 1-year-old growth. So you're constantly pruning these trees. I mean, just even growing the cherries is a pain in the butt. And then finding a way to take that and make a beautiful beer that expresses that and captures that kind of character and the depth of those cherries. There is an art to it too, and you all have done a phenomenal job. So we're going to talk about that, but first...
Hey brewers, Andy here from G&D Chillers. we're all about solving problems in the brew house, staying ahead of the curve, and building chillers that work as hard as you do.
G&D's new Elite 290 Micro Series runs on natural refrigerant with near zero global warming potential, built for brewers who care about sustainability and performance. They recently built one for New Belgium Brewing, delivering around 50% energy savings over CO2 systems and 9% more efficiency than A2Ls. That's real-world impact from a brewery that knows what it takes. With 24/7 support and remote monitoring, your cold side stays dialed in day or night. Learn more about sustainable chiller solutions at gdchillers.com/podcast. And Berkeley Yeast just launched Dry Tropics London, their best-selling liquid yeast strain, now with all the ease-of-use benefits of dry yeast. Dry Tropics London delivers the soft, pillowy mouthfeel and juicy character you'd expect from a top-tier London ale strain, but with a serious upgrade, a burst of thiols that unleash vibrant, layered notes of grapefruit and passion fruit. A lot of brewers love the clean passion fruit you get from Tropics, but they don't want every IPA to be a tropical fruit bomb. At the dry yeast price point, you can pitch and ditch without breaking the bank, or you can co-pitch with your house strain to adjust the intensity of the notes. And with nationwide free shipping, there's never been a better time to try Dry Tropics. Order now at berkeleyyeast.com and experience the ease and impact of Dry Tropics London yeast. And this episode is sponsored by PackTech, delivering craft beer multi-packing you can trust. PackTech's handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable, helping breweries close the loop and advance the circular economy. With a minimalist design, durable functionality you can rely on, and custom color matching, PackTech helps brands stand out while staying sustainable. Trusted by craft brewers nationwide, they offer a smarter, sustainable way to carry your beer. To learn more, visit packtech-opi.com. That's PAKTECH-OPI.com. We normally kick things off with a little bit of background and history. Anthony, why don't you tell us yours? What got you into beer? What got you into brewing? And 17 years now at AleSmith. Kind of trace that arc for me.
Yeah, it's pretty simple with a lot of other home brewers. I went to UC San Diego over here, and quite close to a lot of craft beer anyways. But I have a buddy from high school who got me a homebrew kit, and I just kind of dabbled in that. Towards the end of my schooling at UCSD, I just went to a few homebrew club gatherings and under Quaff, and that's where I met Peter, the owner of AleSmith. And from there, I took the BJCP class that he offered, the Beer Judge Certification Program, and then I went to a few events and kind of get an opening for internship, and so I just went down that route, and the rest is history.
Haven't turned back.
Nope.
Were there fundamental beers for you that just kind of set you off? I mean, obviously San Diego is a hotbed for brewing and has been for a very, very long time, and Quaff in particular is such an interesting thing when you look at the number of breweries that have opened from members of a homebrew club. I mean, you can't really take that club out of the conversation because it has generated and fostered so many professional brewers.
I think I would say that Evil Dead Red was the first beer I had from AleSmith that kind of blew my mind. We only make it seasonally. It's a red ale, just really hoppy. You smell it, you think, oh man, this would be super bitter, hoppy, but we drink it, it's just mostly hop flavor, not much bitterness, and just a good malt backbone.
Malty, hoppy beer. It's funny. Is it coming back into style? We'll see if it does. Funny that's a favorite beer for you in San Diego, where everything goes so ultra lean. But I guess there's some benefit in going against the trend.
I think you're right. Currently, most things are either pale or hazy or mostly yellow. It's the main color you get these days.
Sure. Well, let's talk about Handgepluk Creek. You mentioned that the inspiration for this came from Chad, another prominent homebrewer there with his own Scarabix cherries, and was inspired by your Pesh. You decided to make this as a collaborative project to celebrate O'Brien's anniversary. how did you then, where did you go from there? Now you need to start with a recipe. Did you take what you did for your beer pesh and then start transposing that in for this? How did you all start thinking about the way that these cherries are going to mesh with a typical recipe that you might brew for a mixed fermentation beer inspired by lambic?
No, you're right about that. We started with the original pesh recipe, and we just have a base lambic style beer that we make. We actually started dabbling in wild ales in 2018, and the first ones were terrible. We had a bunch of barrels. We've done everything. Grab dregs from bottles and try to see if that works. Does not work, and we eventually settle on a specific process just because wild ales are the result of spontaneous fermentation, and we don't have that for normally, and they'll have that level of natural control that would exist in San Diego. I mean, we're in an industrial area with lots of dust, lots of trucks that will leave nails and puff your tires, but
I mean, Cantillon is in Brussels, and they figured out some way in there. It is, I would not say it's the most pristine, kind of environment, but I understand what you're saying there. So is there a spontaneous element to this fermentation?
Not quite. I mean, it's spontaneous in the sense that it uses the particular wild yeast and certain bacteria to kind of guide it toward that direction. You kind of just pull apart the lambic style itself and kind of looked at, well, what can we do? What do we not like? What of these elements is unnecessary? Or, there's a lot of complexity in lambic beers, but we were just trying to pinpoint certain ones that we want to touch upon. So a lot of our methods are strategically designed at certain points to introduce, whether it be the lactobacillus to the wild yeast and Saccharomyces to achieve that same flavor profile that you get from lambics.
Let's start though with grain. I mean, a typical lambic grist is going to have barley, but a very significant portion of unmalted wheat. How did you work this piece out? That and then as you think about this, this kind of wild fermentation, typically and historically speaking, needs a very dextrinous malt mash and wort that is just going to be hard for these things to chew on, for all of these bugs to chew on over a very long and slow kind of fermentation. How did you all think about that in the context that you were going to do, and how did that impact then how you built an ingredient list and a kind of approach to the mash on it?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the stuff that you read out there is very traditional, very historical. And you have to remember that a lot of what is out there is based off of malt analysis from a certain era and time. And we have a lot of highly modified malts, so a lot of the stuff is unnecessary. And again, we would kind of take the approach of, well, let's see what we actually need. What does the yeast need, right? Like you said, long chain shears, more dextrins, something that will take a longer time for the Brettanomyces to work on. So in our case, it's very similar to the lambic recipe, with like around 50% barley, and then the rest would be wheat. And we kind of make it the blend. We didn't go the unmalted wheat route just because we don't use that as much. We don't want to play around with something you didn't have as much experience. But we use malted wheat and flaked wheat and mixed together. The flaked wheat offering a little bit more, what we think as more chunkies, for lack of better words.
Chunkies, a very technical term there.
Because it provides a lot more haze that you would than the malted wheat in general. So we add that in there. And so that's basically the malt bill. It's pretty simple.
Sure. As this entire style generally is. And then how did that then start translating into mash process? Again, if we're thinking about lambic, then we're historically talking about a turbid mash. You're talking about a very hot mash, that is there to create a lot of, like you say, long chain sugars and hard to ferment stuff for that Brettanomyces to work in the very, very long run on. But at the same time, you can also do that using modern brew houses and other kinds of techniques, and it's not necessarily required to do a full-on turbid mash these days. And there are plenty of brewers that I've talked to that have put their own kind of tweak and spin on that, knowing what the goal is, but getting there in a similar but not the same way. How do you guys do it?
Yes, as you said, we take a different approach. We don't quite do a turbid mash, but we have a German brew house for our production system. It's a Krohn's Steinecker. And on that system, we're able to go through a series of step mashes. We actually optimize the temperature ranges for a lot of the enzymes that are naturally found in the malt. So this one being brewed on a pilot system, we did actually do step mash. We did start with a ferulic acid rest, which is something we don't normally do. But Chad was very insistent that we would do it. So the ferulic acid rest, and then we went to the beta amylase.
Specifically to allow that fermentation to pull some of that ester character from that ferulic acid that that culture will then work on and turn into other things down the road.
Yeah. We don't usually do ferulic acid rest because there's no way to actually verify on our end if it works, but you do it because it's, we're brewers and have fun sometimes. So, we hit the beta alpha amylase rest after when we mashed out. And from there, it's just pretty much straightforward. We didn't do anything too hot, but we did pull the wort and then boil a portion, kind of like a mini decoction, but not quite. We're not really boiling. We just bring it up to a certain temperature.
But not boiling, just at a...
Just heating up the initial runnings each time to put back on top of the mash to just raise the temperature, because we don't have steam jackets on our pilots, so it's just a straightforward single infusion style.
Sure. And so a step mash, and if I think about, because I tasted this beer a few times throughout our process there, it had a beautiful body that also felt very precise. There are, if I think about the lambic beers and the gueuze and krieks that I've had in Belgian origin, there's a very wide range. Honestly, I think there's a much wider range than we give credit to for either how dry, how sweet, just how attenuated some of these beers can be. Some can taste pretty dry, even though they have a significant amount of body still left to them. Others, the culture eats a lot of that, the proteins that might be left to kind of create that body. Yours, in some way, almost had a what I would expect as a San Diego kind of character to it. It had precision, and I wouldn't call it lean per se, because but it was, it was not a full type of body to the beer. It got very much to the point, and so. So you go through this mash piece, and then talk to me about the next process. Lambic style beer is going to go through, typically speaking, a pretty long boil, 3 hours, maybe more, depending on that. So let's talk about hot side. But before we do that, Oregon hop country is heaven to world-class lager varieties, and Indie Hops is proud to have introduced Oregon's newest lager hop, Lorien, in 2022. Lorien is in a growing list of beers that have found their way to the podium and, more importantly, into the hearts of lager lovers across the country. Discover Indie Hops Lorien. Side effects may include rampant festivities, sales bumps, and exceeded expectations. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And if you're like many podcast listeners, you've got a lot of beers at home and your regular fridge is at capacity, enter the Midea 50/50 Flex. the industry's first dual compartment, 3-way convertible freezer. Here's what all that means for you. Options. The 50/50 has the power to be all freezer, all fridge, or a little bit of both, but you'll probably want to use those 20 cubic feet as a massive garage-ready beer fridge. You can also change which side the door is on or how you want the shelves to be arranged. The 50/50 totally flexes to fit your life. Plus, it's designed to maintain a stable temperature even in non-climate controlled conditions, so you can crack a cold one even on the warmest days in the man cave. Take your garage to the next level. Check out midea.com/US to get more info about this game changer today. Also, your brewery deserves a supplier that can keep your customers engaged with new flavors. That's why Old Orchard releases juice, concentrates, and blends with trending flavor profiles like white sangria and passion orange guava. If you need a custom solution, Old Orchard's R&D team wants to hear from you. Fruit ingredients that get you. Get Old Orchard's free samples at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, tell me about the hot side, Anthony. Where do you go after this kind of hybrid mash?
Yeah, so after, as you mentioned, we don't actually do a 3-hour boil. We just use your usual 60-minute to 75-minute boil. We have direct fire for our pilot system, which allows us to control the heat capacity. And because it has a heating stem below it, it maintains that heat. So if we wanted to achieve something very vigorous, we could just ramp it up to its highest, and we can get up to about 15% evaporation as opposed to like a 6% evaporation in the same amount of time. So on that end, we just ramped it up, 60-minute boil. Chad brought in some unknown hops that we calculate could probably be around 7 to 9 IBUs in the boil.
Unknown hops. So hops that he had just been aging, probably a mix of some old things that have just been sitting out and getting torn up over the years.
Right. Exactly with tradition, right? So,
hey. Although, is it tradition? I mean, yes, there is some tradition to that, but I've seen the way that Cantillon stores their hops, and it's not nearly as ragged as that. Again, the range varies.
Yeah, there's definitely a romantic element to that side of it. But yeah, you're probably right.
And I have seen awesome ways that, the brewers like Jester King have been up in the barn at Jester King as they were aging their hops up there. Matt Tarpey at the Vale had a really cool system where, with multiple bins where they would kind of cycle through in order to kind of aerate everything. But obviously, the key there is to reduce that alpha acid, because you want lower alpha acids in these that to allow some of that lactobacillus to kind of do its own measured job. Some certain lactose strains are pretty hop sensitive there. So you need to kill off a lot of those alpha acids, but you also don't want everything to be like too isovaleric, too cheesy, because that'll set you off in a whole another direction.
Right, exactly. We got to keep those IBUs low. For our next step was just to introduce the bacteria at that point. And as you mentioned, if you have too high of IBUs, that would cause some problems. So at that point, we'll knock out as usual, but then we'll introduce the bacteria at that point initially. And from there, it will get us to a certain titratable acidity range that we're happy with, so we know how far it's gone. And at that point,
when you say introduce the bacteria, so I assume that you're building a blend of Lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, and wild Saccharomyces, probably now cultivated from a lab in order to, have a more kind of measurable thing. Okay.
Right. It's all stuff you can purchase. It's not like we pull it from a dandelion flower or anything. We put the bacteria.
Is there a source for this? Are you willing to talk about that? And if not, it's okay. But
I'll use suppliers out there. You can probably find that out. But I mean, there are lots of lactobacillus strains, and ours is heterofermentative, and so it also produces some alcohol. But each lactobacillus strain is good for different reasons, and in this case, this was good for our reason.
And what is the reason behind that?
Just what flavors they give off. We've done a lot of experience with different lactobacillus, and some of them, can produce off flavors more than others, like THP is a good example of one of them. And just how they react to different IBUs or different temperatures. So we're looking for a specific temperature range that this lactobacillus can operate in. And we do that first. So it's not like a big cocktail poured in. We
start through an acidification stage with this lactobacillus first.
Right. So we acidify first because we know that once the Brettanomyces and the Saccharomyces are in, then it has no capacity to produce anything else at that point.
And it's just such a shocker. I mean, obviously, the funny part is that in the Belgian lambic world, historically, some producers also do this, and there's, is it true to history? That is certainly an argument to be made out there. But I mean, any brewer pouring a bottle of their old lambic into, a now about to ferment batch of their lambic is inoculating in that same kind of way, but also, lowering the acidity. And there are a number of lambic brewers today that do believe in that kind of pre-acidification to, and again, it's like there's a debate there because there is the other side of the argument that says some of these other, wild bacteria like Enterobacter and whatnot that get into these kinds of wild fermentations that are done spontaneously ultimately produce some of the complex flavor that Brettanomyces can work on in the future, as that fermentation goes on. Then there's that flip side of, hey, let's just protect this with lower acidity at the very start. And lacto will, if you pitch a large enough pitch, it's going to work pretty quickly, at the right temperature, within a day or two, you're going to hit a level of acidity that is going to protect that beer pretty well. So you have a TA goal for that. Where do you try to get that TA, that titratable or total acidity?
We get to like around 0.5 to 0.7. Just depends on what we're looking for at the time. It's interesting that you mentioned the other stuff like Enterobacter, Pediococcus. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we came in mind with the process like a production brewer. You'll have 3 years to release this product. It's every accountant's nightmare to hold on to inventory for a couple of years and then sell it for something at a normal price. So
you're not going to tell your CFO that, hey, this is ropey. We just need to give it another year before we release it because it's just too ropey.
Yeah, that's funny. I actually had a ropey beer at Jadia before judging. I was like, wow, this is the first time I've actually seen it. It's kind of cool. And at that moment, I'm like, yeah, we will never use this. Not worth it. Not worth waiting for it to go away. We brewed this early spring of 2024. And so to keep in mind that we want to make sure we release this for O'Brien's anniversary. You don't want to release it after the fact. So we had to get started a little bit early and kind of design the process around that.
So you go through this initial fermentation with lacto, and I imagine, is there a temperature ramp there, or are you just kind of keeping it at a normal fermentation for that? Because, if you're making a kettle sour beer, you're probably going to ramp that at, 95 to 100 just to crank that lacto out. But in this case, and do it in 24 hours so you can just keep that moving. Or was this a little bit of a slower process?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. You can wait a long time for lactobacillus to do its job. At the same time, it would cause oxidation of the wort. So, we knock out a little bit warmer into its happy range, and we let it cool down before we add in the Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces. Lactobacillus fermentation doesn't produce a lot of heat, so it will naturally drop. And from there, we'll pitch our cocktail of the Brett and the Sac. We'll let it ferment until we see it kind of level off. And at that point, that's when we introduce it to neutral white wine barrels.
So, and then I imagine that this wild Saccharomyces and Brettanomyces is also a commercially available culture, but that you then add in a kind of percentage blend that fits the way that you want for it to work.
Correct. And so what we've seen is the Saccharomyces, after they hit their terminal together, the Saccharomyces will just stop. But the Brettanomyces will continue in the barrels, and you probably heard why that's very crucial, the micro-oxidation that allows the Brettanomyces to continue to do its job.
Sure. There's specific strains that that you find, or some blend of them that you really love the combined flavor of.
There's a few. There's like 2 we've used that we like. But yeah, this one was one of our more favorite ones.
So cagey. Won't even talk about the Brettanomyces.
That's what it is. It's Brettanomyces.
Fair. So then talk about you hit terminal in stainless.
Yep.
And then, once you've hit terminal, you then transfer into neutral white wine barrels, California wine, I assume, or?
Yeah. Local white wine barrels. We let it do its job. We'll take our readings every couple months. Actually, this time it was every month we try it.
Every month. Wow.
Just to see where it's at, to make sure that if we have to adjust, we would adjust, but we would have to. Then it would level off. I mean, at that point, we were kind of pressed for time. Chad would come in after his harvest, said, "Hey, we got these cherries, we got to get going." It's like, well, wait a little bit longer. He did freeze it, which is cool, until we were able to let the Brett continue its job. And from then once that was done, we racked it back into the fermenter on top of the cherries.
Well, I want to talk about what that looks like in San Diego. Before we do that, you know the pain all too well. You're guessing at market trends, left in the dark about how your liquids are performing on the shelves. You can't tell if your distributors are actually executing the objectives you gave them. You're losing out on critical revenue opportunities, and that's because access to data was controlled by a single antiquated solution, limiting who could benefit from it, creating little room for innovation in the industry. But now there's a faster, more real-time and value-packed way to get the full picture instantly and strengthen those distributor partnerships. It's time to regain control of your data, sales, and operations. Introducing Orbit by Encompass. Orbit Data and CRM connects your production performance directly to the wider beverage market. Orbit Data provides real-time visibility into retailer data, sales, and inventory so you can make faster and clear decisions. It's also a CRM for your supplier sales team that brings total transparency to your distributor relationships, keeping them accountable to what they need to sell and how. Orbit empowers producers to drive decisions with accurate data, discover new profit streams, and pivot faster than ever before. Go to encompasstech.com/launch-orbit for more details. That's encompasstech.com/launch-orbit. And running a brewery means juggling a lot, managing production, serving guests, selling online, and keeping everything moving behind the scenes. That's where Arrived comes in. What started as a point-of-sale system has grown into the technology your brewery runs on, built specifically for the teams behind great beer. Unlike generic systems, Arrived brings together taproom service, online sales, brewery management, payments, reporting, and growth tools into one complete platform. So instead of bouncing between systems, you can brew, serve, and sell all in one place. Visit Arrived, ARRYVED.com to learn more. Also, pumps are critical to any advanced homebrewing setup, from mash recirculation to wort transfer, and even for cleaning. A quality pump is a key part of every brew day. The SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days, featuring an IP55 water resistance rating, an easy-to-use DIN head with 360-degree rotation, and a flow rate of up to 11 gallons per minute. It has the power to keep your brew day moving. Visit ssbrewtech.com/pump to learn more about how the SS Brew Pump can upgrade your home brewery. All right, so let's, you've got this beer into barrels. You're tasting it every month. You are keeping track of how it is progressing. Sometimes this kind of long fermentation in barrels, there are some breweries, some lambic producers in Belgium where this takes a couple of years. For you all, at what point does that beer hit its maturity where you are ready then to add fruit onto this? And in this case, knowing that it's going to need to sit with that fruit for a while and kind of come together to marry and meld. Is there a different kind of criteria for when this is ready for fruit?
For us, we really wanted it to reach a certain gravity range before we moved it on. If we had a little bit longer time, then we would have left it in the barrels. In this case, like I said, the cherries were ready. We had to get this rolling. So we had to work backwards from the deadline.
Yeah. So what does that look like? You hit terminal or whatever you believe is terminal, knowing that Brettanomyces is still going to keep working on it. Generally, what is your, let's move it out of stainless kind of, terminal point in terms of Plato?
Looking at below 4 Plato at that range. And then at that point, that's when we decide, okay, once you add the cherries, it's going to reignite a little bit more. And that's why you have the benefit of the stainless steel tank to kind of allow for a more vigorous fermentation to start again for a little bit.
So it goes into barrels at just under, say, 4 Plato, and then it dries out from there, and then you move it out of barrels back into stainless?
No, so it comes out of barrels at 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because of the higher mash temperature and just the higher dextrins,
right?
It actually starts a little bit higher. So the Brettanomyces does a significant amount of fermentation in the barrels.
Yeah. So it comes out, in that kind of 4 range. You then put it into stainless for maceration with cherries.
Yeah. So Chad came on by with his cherries. I think he pitted some of them and some of them weren't. And we just put them straight into the tank and then racked all the barrels into the fermenter. And from there, we gave it 3 months before we actually took it back out. It's not pasteurized.
Some pits, some no pits. That's interesting. Is there a logic to that, or is it just I was trying to pit all of these and got really tired of it, and so screw it. We're just going with whatever we got.
I mean, there's some historic sensory notes of adding some nuttiness, which it did, which was kind of cool. If you notice, but it had a very unique cinnamon note from the cherry itself.
100%. I think I wrote the review of this for our best in beer, and I wrote revisiting with a fresh glass in hand, I'm struck by its deep cherry character, rich with nutty almond in the aroma, toasted cereals accented by the slightest hint of cinnamon and pie spice. It feels well-rounded and culinary with a bit of pie crust in the flavor, restrained lemony tartness, a faint woody forest background, and a distant phenolic note that appears in the retro-nasal, multi-dimensional and deep without overpowering the beautiful fruit as the best Belgian creeks are. But in a fascinating turn, this one comes from San Diego. Yeah, no, I think I think we got the same kind of thing that kind of.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah,
that's what we're going for. Not to overwhelm the fruit, or if you don't have the fruit overwhelm the base style either. So I'm glad that you got all those notes.
Yeah, well, like catching that, and you think that is fruit derived. Tasting that kind of base beer coming out of the barrels, like what is it at that point? And how then do you as a brewer say, hey, I think this is, these notes are going to work really well in this next phase of fermentation, re-fermentation with fruit?
I mean, in that initial phase, there's not much to it. It's kind of wordy, a little bit sweet. Just because the Saccharomyces has done its job, but not far enough, and there's just low hop bitterness. We don't really consider it until it goes to the barrels. And that's when we get to try it, kind of see the flavors, complex flavors come out through the Brettanomyces from their fermentation.
It was fascinating to me drinking some, process lambic at the Timmerman's Brewery last year and the year before. Where if you like drinking from this foeder full of, fermenting lambic beer, it was remarkably similar and fruity, and it felt almost like we were drinking hazy IPA straight out of this foeder at this, at Timmerman's, this very old lambic brewery. And it was remarkable that, and you think about it, like, you got this heavily weeded thing with some barley, but also this, very, turbid, kind of approach to the mash, holding in some of that sweetness. Like, I mean, it's all right there. It's kind of fascinating to see, as much as that mixed fermentation crowd would hate to admit that there is commonality with hazy IPA, it's remarkably similar at certain phases of this kind of development. And even right there, before the beer is finished, before it's had time to kind of settle out, clear out, there's a lot of that kind of fruity flavor there in the beer.
Yeah, a lot of the complex flavors come out through the barrel fermentation. Even then, at the end of the barrel fermentation, it was lightly funky. It wasn't, blowing your mind at that point. But I think adding the fruit definitely kicked off a lot more and created a lot more complex flavors that we were like, whoa, this is kind of cool. And if you, I don't know if you sub bottles, but this, because it's not pasteurized, it's going to keep changing. And I had a few bottles of our Petch, and I opened one different years. I'm like, whoa, it's getting way too funky now. So it'll get to a point where it will, if you like that stuff, it'll blow your mind.
That's an interesting point. You're right. These these things change over time. I think that there is something to be said for, especially in this case, drinking these somewhat fresh, and as most lambic producers would suggest that you drink their fruited beers very fresh. And if you want to save and cellar beers, just cellar the goose, because it's designed and meant for that kind of aging. But then talk about that kind of cherry process. So this is still a very small batch. So you load in. You purge that. I shouldn't assume. Do you purge that tank then, knowing that this mixed culture with Brettanomyces is going in there? Control for some of that oxygen to make sure that, again, it doesn't get too weird, because then too much oxygen at that stage can really throw things off and develop some off flavors.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we get the fruit in there, we have to purge the tank. There's going to be some oxygen in the tank, like very low amounts, and even through the racking process. So we try to minimize that. But yeah, THP is the biggest off flavor. That will definitely come out if there's that, just enough oxygen. That flavor is very, at low amounts, cereal, but could get really funky, mousy. That's what they describe that flavor as. So we'll purge the tank. Chad came with the cherries already mostly processed, and then we just racked on top of it. But yeah, generally we have our own fruit, and we did it ourselves. Like when we did the Pesh, that one we got from Specialty Pros a bunch of white and yellow peaches, and then we salt washed them because we wanted to use, if there was any natural yeast on it, we want to kill it, and the salt just helps maintain it. It'll get all the dirt up to the surface. We'll clean it, and same process that we did there, which was we kept pits in half of them and removed pits from the other half. And then same thing. That's how we did. We purged it, added the base beer, and then let it ferment a little bit longer for about 3 months-ish, 3 or 4 months.
Peach pits? What are you talking about? You trying to kill people with cyan? No. I'm just kidding. There again, you can go if you want to hear more about that. I've got a podcast a few years ago, also with Raph of Boca, where he was talking about. He did a high concentration maceration of just peach pits, and just all peach pits, and then and let that sit for a very long time, and then had a brewing chemist, I think it was at the University of Leuven, who then tested it for cyanide levels or any kind of toxin levels, and it was well within any safe for humans realm. And so some of that fear of toxins coming in from some of these things is vastly overblown. But and there's science to back that up too. Just as an aside there, I was making a joke. I was not making light of poisoning human beings. We don't support that.
No poisoning.
Yeah. Better not to poison people. So then, how long did that then sit on cherries? Do you do for that or for the pesh? Do you all punch down fruit? Do you do anything to try to promote that maceration?
No, we just kind of let it sit as is, and then some of it will float in the end, some of it will sink. And then from there, we would rack off of it. We would taste it luckily this is just right in our pilot cellar. We walk by every day. So we would actually get our numbers every week. Just kind of see where it's going, see if it's dropping, if the pH is changing. Flavor definitely changed in that 3-month span, which is cool. And then towards the end, we just racked off of it into another tank, clarified it, and then packaged.
So simple.
Simple.
Such a piece of cake. Anybody can make this beer. What do you attribute its success to? Again, there are lots and lots of this is not a giant commercial category that is lighting up the beer world. Like, you only make this kind of mixed fermentation, lambic and creek style inspired beer just because you love beer, period, and you enjoy the challenge of trying to make a beautiful thing yourself. Obviously, what you all have made here is beautiful, and but from that perspective, like, what do you think are the roots of the excellence in this? What are the core pillars that have made this beer, this particular iteration that you all have made, so compelling out there relative to any other beer in this, in this similar kind of category? I mean, I have my own ideas, but I'm just curious why, what you might attribute some of that to. Obviously, I think fruit quality, is a big piece of that. Base beer has to be a big piece of that. Fine attention to process, controlling things like oxygen at every stage of your process, and understanding what it's going to do and being able to manipulate, I think, what probably weighs into this. Are there some, kind of other like factors of excellence that you think that have helped this beer kind of shine on such a big stage?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the process. I mean, we pride ourselves on consistency and trying to quality product. So our focus is always, okay, what are we doing? What's our goal in making this product? And then how do we achieve that through a consistent process? I think just us, I guess, being us, we're just going to make we strive to make the exact beer that we're hoping to make, that we envisioned, and let's do it consistently. The fruit has a lot, definitely has a part to play in it. The Scarsby cherries are very unique, something that you can't really get anywhere in the States other than at Chad's place. I think the World Beer Cup definitely put a spotlight on this beer. And what's cool about the World Beer Cup is they're all professionals and they're all brewers, so we're all thinking the same things. And happy to know that they love it as much as we do.
Well, we love it too. It was a remarkable beer, and just obviously one of the 20 best, for us that we've tasted out of thousands of beers last year, and an incredible thing. And thank you all for making it. Before we wrap up here, I just want to, finish this off with a question for you. You've been making AleSmith beer for 17 years. You certainly have to have some labors of love. What, in addition to Handgepluk Creek, what are your favorite beers that AleSmith makes? and why do you love them so much? Is it are there process pieces or their flavor pieces? If it's time for shift beer or time to share something very special that you've made with friends, what are those beers that are your go-tos that you make?
Wow. Oh, really good question. There's I like all the products that we make. We used to have
That's very political. I appreciate that. I'm not going to pick among my kids, right? I love all the beers that we make.
I just got to preface it with that. Because there's they're the beers I like for the flavor, and the beers I like to just drink regularly, and they're the beers I like to make because the process is fun. I'll have to say a lot of the barrel aged beers that we make, I love the process. I like that we get to the point, we make the beer, from recipe design to cellaring, and then we move it to a barrel. I like to choose the barrels. I like to choose the blends, see what we get out of it. Looking at the numbers. I like looking at numbers. And then just aligning that with our sensory profile. So barrel aged beers, generally my favorite, the ones that have with more process, like Speedway, like how we do coffee with that, the multi-step beers I like to drink. Like every brewer, mostly lagers, very, very basic. I really like our old ale, just of the flavor, the complexity of that one the most. That would probably be my favorite strong ale that we make.
Good stuff. Well, that library of influential and important AleSmith beers is deep and extensive, and the awards you've won across a lot of those styles, is absolutely impressive and cool thing. Anyway, I appreciate you talking with us about how to make Handgepluk Kriek. G&D's Elite 290 Micro Series is built for brewers who care about sustainability and performance. Berkeley Yeast's Dry Tropics London offers their best-selling liquid yeast strain with the ease of use of dry yeast. Pactex handles are made from 100% recycled plastic and are fully recyclable. Indie Hops Lorient has found its way into the hearts of lager lovers across the country. The Midea 50/50 Flex can convert to all fridge, all freezer, or half and half with just the touch of a button. Old Orchard is your one-stop shop for fruit juice concentrates, purees, and blends. Orbit Data from Encompass provides real-time visibility into retailer data, sales, and inventory. Arrived brings together all the tools you need in one complete platform. And the SS Brew Pump from SS Brewtech is engineered to tackle even the messiest brew days. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. And of course, we will send you once a year our Best in Beer issue, which last year featured Handgepluk Kriek from AleSmith as a beer of the year and a 98 score from our blind judges. A remarkable thing that just won a gold medal in its category at the World Beer Cup as well. Because the World Beer Cup judges just like to copy the judges of craft beer and brewing. It's just how it is, and the GABF judges too. For the record, no, I love it when those two things we find that confluence between those two things, and we align on truly phenomenal beers, and this is one. Anthony, if people want to learn more about AleSmith and the beers that you all make, both the mainline beers like Pale Ale, like the 394 Pale, and things like Wee Heavy that I personally love and I wish more people would make out there in the market. Your barrel-aged beers like Barrel-Aged Speedway, these beers with coffee that you all do a phenomenal job with, or even the special projects like Handgepluk Kriek, which it's just kind of a one-off, and good luck for anyone trying it. It was a very small batch and a spectacular beer. So maybe with this, we're just teasing people with it by talking about it now. Anyway, where can they find more about AleSmith out there in real life and in the digital space?
We have a social media on Instagram. That's our most active one, AleSmith Brewing. But we also have a website where you can sign up for our newsletter, and that's where we'll mention events and kind of special releases.
It was really fun talking with you about these beers, Anthony. Cheers.
Oh, thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.